"Step away from my daughter." A single dad's warning to 3 bullies froze the crowd. But when his special forces passed exploded into the open, no one could believe the quiet mechanic was the deadliest man in town. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Jefferson Park as red, white, and blue streamers danced in the warm summer breeze. The annual 4th of July picnic was in full swing, with the sweet scent of barbecue smoke mingling with the sugary aroma of cotton candy and fresh lemonade. Ethan Cole wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead as he wrestled with an uncooperative folding chair. The metal legs finally clicked into place, and he set it down on a patch of grass with a satisfying thump. Looking up, he caught sight of his daughter Maddie's retreating form as she headed toward the refreshment stand, her long brown ponytail swaying with each step. "Dad, I'm going to find Sarah and Katie," she called over her shoulder, already halfway there. "Stay where I can see you," he replied, though he wasn't sure she heard him over the upbeat country music blaring from the speakers near the pavilion. Ethan settled into his chair, his watchful eyes never straying far from Maddie. It was a habit born from years of military training and fatherly concern, a combination that had become second nature since losing his wife. The crowd around him buzzed with celebration. Young families spread out on checkered blankets, elderly couples swaying to the music, and children darting between groups with sparklers held high like tiny torches. Mrs. Henderson from the library waved as she passed by, balancing a plate piled high with potato salad. "Beautiful evening, isn't it, Ethan? Your auto shop closed early today?" "Yes, ma'am," he nodded politely. "Thought Maddie deserved a proper holiday celebration. Such a good father." She smiled warmly before continuing on her way. The compliment sat uncomfortably on his shoulders. Being a single parent meant constantly questioning whether he was doing enough, being enough. He watched as Maddie found her friends by the lemonade stand, their excited chatter and laughter carrying across the park. She looked so much like her mother, sometimes it made his heart ache. A group of young children raced past his chair, sparklers crackling and spitting golden stars into the early evening air. Their parents called out careful warnings, but their gleeful squeals drowned out any adult concerns. The smell of grilled hot dogs and hamburgers wafted over from the row of smoking grills, where volunteers from the fire department flipped patties and called out order numbers. Ethan checked his watch. Still a few hours until the fireworks display. He'd chosen this spot carefully, far enough from the speakers to avoid the worst of the noise, but with a clear view of both the refreshment area and the field where they'd launch the fireworks later. Old habits died hard, and situational awareness had been drilled into him long before he became a father. The mayor's wife was making rounds through the crowd, her perfect smile firmly in place as she shook hands and cooed over babies. She gave Ethan a slight nod as she passed, but didn't stop to chat. He preferred it that way. Small talk had never been his strong suit, and since moving to town 3 years ago, he'd maintained a polite but distant relationship with most of the locals. His attention snapped back to Maddie's location when he noticed her friends had disappeared, probably off to find more excitement than the refreshment stand could offer. His daughter stood alone now, absently stirring her lemonade with a straw. That's when he spotted them, 3 young men, probably in their early 20s, moving through the crowd with a kind of swagger that set off warning bells in his mind. They were dressed too nicely for a casual town picnic, their designer clothes and carefully styled hair marking them as outsiders or, more likely, local rich kids home from college. The tallest one nudged his friends and nodded in Maddie's direction. Something in their body language made Ethan's muscles tense. He watched as they approached the refreshment stand, strategically positioning themselves around Maddie. The shortest one said something that made her shake her head and take a step back, but she found herself blocked by the other 2 who had circled behind her. Their stance was casual, but Ethan recognized the predatory nature of their movements. The music seemed to fade into the background as his focus narrowed. He observed how Maddie's shoulders hunched slightly, her body language screaming discomfort. The cup in her hand trembled almost imperceptibly as she tried to step away again, only to find herself more firmly cornered. Without conscious thought, Ethan was on his feet. Years of training and instinct took over as he moved through the crowd with quiet efficiency. He didn't run. Running caused panic, and panic never helped the situation. Instead, he walked with purpose, his movements controlled and deliberate. His eyes never left the group, cataloging details automatically. The way the tallest one kept looking around nervously, the flash of an expensive watch on another's wrist, the slight slur in their voices that suggested they'd been drinking. The crowd seemed to part before him, perhaps responding to something in his bearing or expression. A few heads turned to watch his progress, conversations dying mid-sentence as he passed. The distance between his abandoned chair and the refreshment stand seemed to stretch endlessly, though it couldn't have been more than 30 yards. One of the young men reached out to touch Maddie's arm, and Ethan's pace quickened fractionally. He could see his daughter's face clearly now. The mix of fear and uncertainty in her eyes, the way she was trying to maintain her composure while looking for an escape route. She hadn't spotted him yet, but several other picnickers had. The atmosphere around the refreshment stand grew tense as people began to notice the situation unfolding. The shortest of the three leaned in closer to Maddie, saying something that made his friends laugh. She clutched her cup tighter, the plastic crinkling under her fingers. A muscle twitched in Ethan's jaw as he closed the final few steps between them, his shadow falling across the group like an approaching storm. Ethan's heart rate remained steady as he approached the group, but his trained eyes caught every detail. 3 young men, probably in their early 20s, had backed Maddie against a tree near the refreshment stand. Their body language screamed trouble, shoulders squared, stance aggressive, entirely too close to his daughter. Maddie's discomfort was clear in her crossed arms and tight expression. The tallest one, wearing a red tank top that showed off his tattoos, leaned in closer to Maddie. "Come on, sweetheart. We just want to show you a good time." "I said no, thanks," Maddie replied, her voice firm but tight with tension. Ethan closed the distance in measured steps, his presence becoming impossible to ignore. Years of Special Forces training had taught him how to move with purpose, how to command attention without saying a word. His boots made no sound on the grass, but heads started turning as he approached. "Step away from my daughter." The words came out quiet, almost gentle, but carried an unmistakable edge of authority. The kind of tone that had once commanded men in combat situations, that had kept soldiers alive in the darkest moments. The 3 young men turned, clearly annoyed at the interruption. But their cocky expressions faltered when they met Ethan's steady gaze. He stood perfectly still, hands loose at his sides, but something in his posture made them take an instinctive step back. "We were just talking," the one in the red tank top muttered, but his earlier bravado had evaporated. "No, you weren't." Ethan's voice remained calm, but his eyes never wavered. "And now you're leaving." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the tension in the air. The cheerful sounds of the picnic seemed to fade into the background as everyone watched the scene unfold. Parents pulled their children closer, sensing something significant was happening. The second young man, wearing a backwards baseball cap, grabbed his friend's arm. "Come on, man. Let's go." He'd recognized something in Ethan's bearing that his friend hadn't, the kind of quiet confidence that only came from real experience. The third boy was already backing away, eyes darting between his friends and Ethan. The one in the red tank top tried to maintain his tough guy act, but it crumbled under Ethan's unwavering stare. Without another word, they turned and walked away, their quick pace betraying their desire to escape. Maddie let out a shaky breath. "Dad, you okay, sweetheart?" Ethan's voice immediately softened as he turned to his daughter. She nodded, color returning to her cheeks. "Yeah, I'm fine. They were just being jerks." Ethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, but his eyes scanned the surrounding area one more time, an old habit that had never quite left him. The crowd that had gathered was now buzzing with whispered conversations. "Did you see that? Those boys just ran off. The way he stood. Isn't he just a mechanic? Military has to be. Special Forces, I heard." As Ethan guided Maddie back toward their picnic table, the whispers followed them. Mrs. Henderson, who'd lived in town for 40 years, leaned over to her friend and said in a stage whisper, "I always knew there was something about that quiet man. No ordinary mechanic stands like that." Maddie walked beside her father, stealing glances at him every few steps. She'd always known him as Dad, the guy who made her pancakes on Sunday mornings, who could fix any car that rolled into his shop, who still teared up watching old movies with her. But now she saw something else, something that had always been there but hidden beneath the surface. They reached their picnic table, where their untouched plates of barbecue and potato salad waited. Ethan pulled out a chair for Maddie, then sat down across from her. The murmurs from the crowd continued to ripple through the park. "I didn't know you could do that," Maddie said quietly, studying her father's face with new curiosity. Ethan reached for a napkin, his movements as casual as if he'd just returned from getting an extra serving of coleslaw. Do what? Make 3 guys twice my size run away without even raising your voice. His lips twitched in a small smile, but his eyes held a depth of experience that Maddie had never noticed before. The late afternoon sun caught the silver starting to show at his temples, and for the first time, Maddie wondered about all the years before she was born, all the things she didn't know about her father. The whispers around them grew louder as people passed by their table, each one stealing glances at the mechanic who had suddenly become the most interesting person at the 4th of July picnic. The story was already spreading across the park like wildfire, growing with each retelling. "That's Ethan Cole," someone said nearby. "My cousin said he was some kind of special operative before he opened the garage. I heard he served overseas. Elite forces. Who would have thought? He's so quiet at the PTA meetings." Maddie watched as her father calmly picked up his fork and took a bite of potato salad, seemingly oblivious to the stir he'd caused. But she knew better now. He noticed everything. She just hadn't realized until today how much more there was to notice about him. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft clink of forks against plates. Through the window, the last remnants of sunset painted the sky in gentle purples and blues. Maddie pushed her green beans around her plate, stealing glances at her father between bites. Ethan noticed. He always noticed, but waited patiently for whatever was on her mind. "Dad." Maddie finally broke the silence, setting down her fork. "Were you in the military?" Ethan's hand paused midway to his mouth. He lowered his fork slowly, carefully considering his response. The question wasn't unexpected after what happened at the picnic, but that didn't make it easier to answer. "Yes," he said simply, meeting her eyes across the worn kitchen table. The overhead light cast soft shadows on his weathered face. Maddie leaned forward, elbows on the table, something he usually reminded her not to do, but tonight he let it slide.
"Why didn't you ever tell me?"
"It was a different part of my life," Ethan replied, his voice gentle but firm. "Before you were born, before I met your mother. But the way you handled those guys today." Maddie's eyes shone with curiosity and something else. Pride, maybe. Everyone was talking about it. "Mrs. Henderson said you moved like someone who's had training," Ethan finished for her, taking a sip of water. "That's all it was, sweetheart. Training." "What kind of training?" Maddie pressed. "What did you do in the military?" Ethan set his glass down and studied his daughter's face. She had her mother's determination, that same stubborn set to her jaw. He saw so much of Sarah in her sometimes it made his chest ache. "I served in the Special Forces," he said after a long moment. The words felt strange in his mouth, like speaking a language he hadn't used in years. It was a long time ago. Maddie's eyes widened. "Special Forces? Like the Green Berets?" A small smile tugged at the corner of Ethan's mouth. "Something like that. Did you see combat?" The smile faded. Ethan pushed his plate away slightly. Memories he kept carefully locked away threatening to surface. "Yes," he said quietly. "I saw things, experienced things. I never want you to see or experience." The kitchen fell silent again. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating the walls before fading away. Maddie fiddled with her napkin, processing this new information about her father. "Is that why you're so careful? About everything?" she asked softly. Ethan reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His palm was rough from years of working on engines, but his touch was gentle. "I'm careful because I love you, Maddie. Because keeping you safe is the most important thing in my life. But I'm not a little kid anymore, Dad." "No," he agreed. "You're not. But the world can be dangerous, and what happened today at the picnic proved that. Those young men had no right to corner you like that." Maddie withdrew her hand, wrapping her arms around herself. "They were just being jerks. I could have handled it." "Maybe," Ethan said, his voice taking on an edge she rarely heard. "But you shouldn't have to handle it. Not when I'm around." "Is that why you started the auto shop?" Maddie asked suddenly. "To leave all that behind?" Ethan stood up, gathering their plates. The familiar routine of cleaning up after dinner helped steady him. "Partly," he admitted, running water in the sink. "When your mother died, I knew I needed something different, something steady. a way to be there for you. Maddie got up and grabbed a dish towel, falling into their usual pattern, him washing, her drying. Mom knew about your military service, right? She knew everything, Ethan said softly, handing her a clean plate. She was the first person I could really talk to about it. Do you ever miss it? Maddie's voice was hesitant. Being in the military? Ethan paused, soap suds dripping from his hands. I miss the sense of purpose sometimes, he said carefully. The brotherhood. But I have a different purpose now. They finished the dishes in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As Maddie hung up the towel, another car drove past the house. This time, the headlights lingered, illuminating the kitchen through the thin curtains. Ethan moved to the window, watching as the vehicle slowed, then finally moved on. Dad? Maddie's voice pulled him back. You okay? Fine, he said automatically, but his eyes remained fixed on the street outside. Years of training had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about that car set off warning bells in his mind. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement of Cole's Auto Repair. Ethan pulled up in his weathered pickup truck, the familiar scent of motor oil and rubber greeting him as he stepped out. His boots crunched on loose gravel as he made his way to the shop's entrance, keys jingling in his calloused hands. The old brick building had been his sanctuary for the past 5 years, a place where broken things could be fixed with patience and the right tools. The morning routine was as familiar to him as breathing. Unlock the front door, flip on the lights, start the coffee maker, and check the mail. But today was different. The usually empty mailbox was stuffed so full that several pieces had fallen to the ground. Ethan's jaw tightened as he gathered the scattered envelopes and loose papers. Most were plain white envelopes with no return addresses. Inside his small office, Ethan sat at his desk and began opening them one by one. The first note, written in harsh black marker, made his stomach clench. Keep your mouth shut. He opened another. You'll regret what you did. A third contained just 2 words. Watch out. The coffee maker gurgled in the background as Ethan methodically went through each message. His expression remained calm, but his eyes hardened with each threat. The military training kicked in automatically. Assess the threat, maintain awareness, protect the mission. Only now. The mission was keeping Maddie safe. The bell above the shop door chimed. Ethan's hand instinctively moved toward his desk drawer before he recognized Mrs. Martinez, his elderly neighbor who lived 3 houses down from the shop. Good morning, Ethan, she said softly, wringing her hands in front of her floral print dress. Her usually cheerful face was creased with worry. I hope I'm not disturbing you too early. Not at all, Mrs. Martinez. Ethan stood and gestured to the chair across from his desk. Coffee? She shook her head, perching nervously on the edge of the seat. I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure I should. Her eyes darted to the window, as if checking to see if anyone was watching. Ethan waited patiently, his face showing nothing but quiet attention. Years of intelligence work had taught him the value of silence. It's about what happened at the picnic yesterday, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. One of those boys, the tall one with the expensive clothes, that was Jared Thompson, the mayor's son. The pieces clicked into place. Ethan thought back to the boy's arrogant stance, the designer clothes, the way the other 2 had followed his lead. It made sense now. Robert Thompson has been mayor for 12 years, Mrs. Martinez explained, leaning forward. He controls everything in this town, Ethan. The council, the police, even some of the businesses. And Jared, she shook her head. That boy has been trouble since he was little, but nobody ever does anything about it. His father makes sure of that. Ethan glanced down at the pile of threatening notes on his desk. This wasn't just teenage retaliation. This was power flexing its muscles. I've lived here all my life, Mrs. Martinez continued, her voice trembling slightly. I've seen what happens to people who cross the Thompsons. Last year, when the hardware store owner complained about Jared vandalizing his windows, suddenly there were health code violations. The store closed 2 months later. Ethan nodded slowly, his mind already calculating angles and implications. He'd faced down warlords and terrorists, but small-town politics could be just as dangerous in their own way. Thank you for telling me this, Mrs. Martinez, he said quietly. She stood, smoothing her dress with shaking hands. Just be careful, Ethan. You're a good man, And Maddie is such a sweet girl. I'd hate to see anything happen to either of you." The bell chimed again as she left, leaving Ethan alone with the scattered threats on his desk and the weight of this new knowledge. Mayor Thompson's son. Political dynamite indeed. He gathered the threatening notes into a neat pile, his movements precise and controlled. The morning sun streamed through the window, highlighting the dust motes in the air and the gray starting to show at his temples. In the distance, he could hear the town coming to life. Cars passing, doors opening, people starting their day, unaware of the currents running beneath the surface of their peaceful community. The coffee maker beeped, signaling it was ready, but Ethan remained at his desk, looking at the pile of threats. He'd spent years in special forces protecting people from threats they never knew existed. Now, in this small town where he'd hoped to find peace, he faced a different kind of battle. One where the enemy wore expensive clothes and carried political influence instead of weapons. A truck pulled into the shop's parking lot, his first customer of the day. Ethan tucked the threatening notes into his desk drawer and stood up. He had work to do, cars to fix, and a daughter to protect. Whatever storm was coming, he would face it the same way he'd faced everything else in his life. Head on, with quiet strength and unwavering determination. The morning bell rang through the hallways of Pine Valley High School. Maddie Cole walked with purposeful steps, her backpack slung over one shoulder, trying to blend in with the crowd of students rushing to their first classes. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she made her way to her locker, her fingers working the familiar combination. A group of girls she usually sat with at lunch passed by without acknowledging her. Their whispered conversations stopped abruptly when they saw her, replaced by pointed glances and poorly hidden smirks. Maddie's stomach tightened, but she kept her chin up, just like her father had taught her. "Well, if it isn't the soldier's princess," a voice sneered behind her. Two of Jared Thompson's friends leaned against the nearby lockers, their Letterman jackets marking them as part of his inner circle. "Does Daddy fight all your battles for you?" Maddie's hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her history textbook. She tried to ignore them, but their words cut deep. "Hey, Princess, we're talking to you," the taller one said, moving closer. "What's the matter? Need Daddy to come save you again?" "Leave me alone," Maddie said firmly, though her voice wavered slightly. She closed her locker and turned to walk away, but they followed. "Or what? You'll call in the special forces?" They laughed, drawing stares from passing students. "Better watch out, guys. Her dad might appear out of nowhere and take us all down." Maddie quickened her pace, her cheeks burning. She made it to her first class just as the final bell rang, sliding into her seat near the back. As Mrs. Henderson started her lecture on World War II, Maddie could feel the stares of her classmates boring into her back. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan pulled into the parking lot of his garage, his coffee cup still warm in his hand. From a distance, everything looked normal. The same brick building, the same worn sign, the same tools waiting to fix the day's problems. But as he got closer, his military training kicked in, noticing something was off. The morning light revealed angry red letters sprayed across the front of his building. "Go back to war." Ethan set his coffee down slowly on the hood of a customer's car. His fingers curled into fists, then deliberately relaxed. The paint was still fresh, probably done in the early hours of the morning. He touched it gently, coming away with red on his fingertips. "Oh, good Lord," Mrs. Martinez, his elderly neighbor, gasped as she walked by with her small dog. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. This isn't right." "It's okay, Mrs. Martinez," Ethan said calmly, though his jaw was tight. "Just some kids acting tough." But they both knew it wasn't just kids. This was a message clear as day from people who didn't want him standing up to their precious sons. Throughout the day, Ethan worked on cars while fielding concerned calls from customers who'd seen the graffiti. He scrubbed at the paint during his lunch break, but the letters still showed through stubbornly, a constant reminder of the tension building in their small town. When Maddie texted asking if he could pick her up after school instead of her taking the bus, he knew something was wrong. His daughter loved her independence. Asking for a ride was out of character. He found her waiting alone on the school steps, her shoulders hunched forward in a way that made his heart ache. She climbed into the truck without a word, her usually bright eyes red-rimmed and distant. The drive home was quiet, broken only by the soft country music playing on the radio. Ethan waited, knowing his daughter would talk when she was ready. They pulled into their driveway just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside their modest home, Maddie dropped her backpack by the door and headed straight for the kitchen. She mechanically went through the motions of making a sandwich, but halfway through, her hands started shaking so badly she had to put down the knife. "Dad," she said, her voice cracking, "I don't want to go to school anymore." Ethan crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, gathering his daughter into his arms as she finally broke down. Her tears soaked into his shirt as she told him about the taunts, the whispers, the way her friends had turned their backs. "I thought I could handle it," she sobbed. "I tried to be strong like you taught me, but they won't stop. They keep saying things about you, about us." Ethan held her tighter, his daughter's pain cutting deeper than any wound he'd received in combat. He stroked her hair, just like he used to when she was little and had nightmares. "Listen to me, sweetheart," he said softly but firmly. "I won't let anyone hurt you. We're going to get through this together." As Maddie's sobs gradually quieted to hiccups, Ethan closed his eyes and prayed silently for strength. Strength to protect his daughter, strength to handle this situation with wisdom, and strength to keep his own anger in check. He'd faced down enemies in war zones, but watching his daughter suffer tested his resolve in ways he'd never imagined. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the City Hall windows as Ethan Cole sat in the polished wooden chair outside Mayor Thompson's office. The administrative assistant kept glancing at him nervously from behind her desk, her fingers tapping restlessly on her keyboard. The wall clock's tick-tick-tick seemed to grow louder with each passing minute. Finally, the heavy oak door opened. "Mr. Cole," Mayor Thompson's voice carried that practiced political warmth. "Please come in." Ethan rose slowly, his military bearing evident in his straight posture and measured steps. Inside the office, Officer Dan Matthews stood near the window, his thumbs hooked in his duty belt. The mayor gestured to a leather chair facing his massive desk. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Mayor Thompson said, settling into his high-backed chair. "I thought it would be good for us to have a friendly conversation about recent events." Ethan remained silent, his calm gaze steady. The mayor's smile tightened slightly. "Look, Ethan. May I call you Ethan? We're a small town. We all want what's best for our community." The mayor leaned forward, folding his hands on his desk. "This situation with the boys at the picnic, well, sometimes these things can get blown out of proportion." "3 young men were harassing my daughter," Ethan said quietly. "I'd say that's exactly the proportion it needs to be." Officer Matthews cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole, we understand your concern as a father, but these are good kids from good families. They just got a little rowdy at a holiday celebration." The mayor nodded eagerly. "Exactly. Boys will be boys, right? And my son Jared, well, he feels terrible about the whole thing." "Does he?" Ethan's voice remained level. "Is that why my garage was vandalized? Why my daughter is being bullied at school?" A flash of irritation crossed the mayor's face. "Now, there's no proof connecting any of that to Jared or his friends, but I'm sure if you were to publicly say this was all a misunderstanding, things would calm down quickly. You want me to apologize?" Ethan's eyebrows rose slightly. "To the boys who were threatening my daughter?" "Not apologize exactly." The mayor waved his hand dismissively. "Just smooth things over. Make a statement saying you might have overreacted. These boys have bright futures ahead of them. We wouldn't want one small incident to derail that." Ethan sat perfectly still, his mind flashing back to countless missions where staying calm meant survival. "And what about my daughter's future? Her right to feel safe in her own town?" "Mr. Cole." Officer Matthews stepped forward, his tone conciliatory. "Nobody wants any trouble here. Sometimes the smartest thing is to just let these things go." "Let it go," Ethan repeated softly. He stood up, causing both men to tense slightly. "My wife died when Maddie was 8 years old. On her deathbed, I promised her I would always protect our daughter. That's not something I can let go." The mayor's face hardened. "I strongly suggest you reconsider your position, Mr. Cole. This town runs on relationships, on people working together. You wouldn't want to find yourself isolated." "Is that a threat, Mr. Mayor?" "Of course not." Thompson smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just a friendly observation about small-town life." Ethan walked to the door, then turned back. "I've faced worse threats than small-town politics. I won't apologize for protecting my daughter, and if anything happens to her, or to our property, I'll know exactly where to start looking." He left the office, letting the door close firmly behind him. The administrative assistant quickly looked down at her computer, pretending she hadn't been listening. Outside City Hall, Maddie was waiting on a bench, her school backpack at her feet. She jumped up when she saw him.
Dad, how did it go?
Ethan put his arm around her shoulders as they started walking home. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, casting their long shadows ahead of them on the sidewalk. They wanted me to say it was all a misunderstanding, he said honestly. Maddie had always appreciated that he didn't sugarcoat things for her. But you didn't, right? She looked up at him anxiously. No, honey, I didn't. He squeezed her shoulder. And I won't. Some things are worth standing up for, no matter the cost. They walked in silence for a moment, their footsteps in sync. I'm scared, Dad, Maddie admitted quietly. Not just for me, but for you too. Your business. Ethan stopped walking and turned to face his daughter. The sunset silhouetted them against the darkening sky, a father and daughter standing together against the world. Listen to me, Maddie. In the military, I learned that the hardest battles are the ones worth fighting. And nothing is more worth fighting for than you. He took a deep breath. We'll face this together. Maddie nodded, wiping away a tear. They stood there for a moment longer, their shadows stretching behind them, both anxious about what lay ahead but determined not to face it alone. The community center's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Ethan stood in the empty gymnasium. The scuffed wooden floor and faded basketball lines reminded him of his own youth, before the military, before marriage, before losing Sarah. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket, the volunteer application he'd filled out last night. Mr. Cole? Miss Rivera, the center's director, approached with quick steps. I have to admit I was surprised by your call. Her warm smile put him at ease. Most people who've had trouble with the Thompson family tend to lay low. Laying low isn't really my style, Ethan said quietly. These kids need something positive in their lives. Structure, purpose. Maddie lingered near the doorway, arms crossed. Dad, are you sure about this, after everything that's happened? Ethan turned to his daughter. That's exactly why we need to do this, sweetheart. Fighting back doesn't always mean using fists. Miss Rivera's eyes brightened. Well, we could certainly use both of you. Ethan, we have a group of teenage boys who could benefit from some male guidance. And Maddie, I hear you're excellent at math? Maddie shifted her weight, uncrossing her arms. Yes, I am. We have elementary school kids who struggle with basic math. They could use a tutor who makes it less scary. The next afternoon, Ethan faced his first group of boys. 6 teenagers slouched on the bleachers, including Tommy Martinez, one of Jared's regular companions. The boy's hostile stare made his feelings clear. First thing we're going to learn is respect, Ethan began, his voice calm but firm, for ourselves and for others. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, a habit from his military days. When you enter this gym, you leave your attitudes at the door. What if we don't want to? Tommy challenged, earning snickers from the others. Ethan met his gaze steadily. Then you're free to leave. But if you stay, you'll learn something valuable about yourself. He paused, letting his words sink in. Nobody's forcing you to be here. To his surprise, nobody left. In the adjacent classroom, Maddie sat with 3 elementary school students, working through multiplication tables. Her initial reluctance faded as she watched their faces light up when they solved a problem correctly. 9 times 7? She asked, holding up a flashcard. 63, little Maria exclaimed, bouncing in her chair. That's right, Maddie high-fived her, remembering how her mom used to help her with homework. The memory brought a smile instead of the usual ache. Days turned into weeks. Ethan's program evolved beyond simple exercise routines. He taught the boys breathing techniques for managing anger, team-building exercises that required trust, and the importance of personal accountability. Tommy remained resistant at first, testing boundaries with sarcastic comments and half-hearted participation. But Ethan noticed small changes: Tommy arriving on time, helping put away equipment without being asked, defending a younger kid from harassment in the hallway. One rainy afternoon, as Ethan demonstrated proper push-up form, Tommy stayed behind after the others left. Mr. Cole, his voice was unusually quiet. Can I ask you something? Ethan wiped his face with a towel. Of course. How do you... Tommy struggled with the words. How do you stay so calm, even when people are being jerks to you? Ethan considered his answer carefully. It's taken years of practice, and plenty of mistakes along the way. He sat on the lowest bleacher, gesturing for Tommy to join him. Strength isn't about dominating others. It's about controlling yourself. Tommy nodded slowly. Jared, he hesitated, then continued. Jared's been saying stuff about you, trying to get us to mess with your garage again. And what do you think about that? I think. Tommy stared at his hands. I think it's wrong. You're actually trying to help us, and he's just... He shook his head. My dad's never around. Mom works 2 jobs. Nobody ever showed me the stuff you're teaching us. The genuine gratitude in Tommy's voice touched something deep in Ethan's heart. Here was proof that change was possible, that walls could crumble 1 brick at a time. Thank you for telling me this, Ethan said softly. It takes courage to stand up for what's right, especially when it means standing up to friends. Tommy stood, shouldering his backpack. See you Thursday, Mr. Cole? For the first time, there was respect in his voice. I'll be here, Ethan promised. Later that evening, as Ethan and Maddie walked home, she surprised him by slipping her hand into his something she hadn't done since she was little. You know what, Dad? She said. Maria asked me today if I could be her big sister. Like, officially. She squeezed his hand. Maybe we're both making a difference. Ethan looked at his daughter, seeing Sarah's compassion shining in her eyes. Maybe we are, sweetheart. Maybe we are. Through the growing darkness, Ethan could feel a shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable. Not everyone would change their minds about him, but Tommy's transformation proved that sometimes the strongest response to hatred wasn't force, it was persistent, patient love. The streetlights flickered on as they walked, casting warm pools of light on the sidewalk. In the distance, the community center's windows glowed like beacons in the gathering dusk. Inside those walls, small miracles were happening, one troubled heart at a time. The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of First Baptist Church, casting colorful patterns across the wooden pews. Ethan and Maddie Cole sat in their usual spot, 5 rows from the back, where they'd attended services every Sunday since moving to town 3 years ago. The familiar scent of old hymnals and polished wood filled the air. Maddie smoothed her floral dress and glanced sideways at her father. Even here, in church, Ethan maintained his perfect posture, shoulders straight, chin level, hands folded carefully in his lap. But today, something felt different. The usual peaceful atmosphere was charged with an unfamiliar tension. As the congregation filed in for the service, Ethan noticed Mrs. Henderson, who usually sat directly in front of him, choose a pew on the opposite side of the church. Her husband followed, throwing an apologetic look their way before hurrying after his wife. Good morning, Ethan. Tom Parker, one of his regular customers, approached with a warm smile. That was quite something you did at the picnic. We need more men like you looking out for our kids. Ethan nodded politely. Just doing what any father would do, Tom. More people entered, and Maddie watched as they divided like a stream around a rock, some drawing closer with admiring looks, others giving them a wide berth. She heard snippets of whispered conversations. Military background. Special forces, I heard. Dangerous man. Better stay away. The organ began to play, and Pastor Mike stepped up to the pulpit. Let us pray, he announced, and heads bowed throughout the sanctuary. Maddie closed her eyes but couldn't concentrate on the prayer. The whispers echoed in her mind. During the hymn singing, she noticed Sally Jenkins, her lab partner in chemistry, staring at her from 2 rows ahead. When their eyes met, Sally quickly looked away and whispered something to her mother. Mrs. Jenkins frowned and pulled Sally closer, as if Maddie might somehow be contagious. The sermon was about forgiveness, but Maddie barely heard it. She was too aware of the subtle shifting of bodies when Ethan reached for a Bible from the pew rack, the slight flinches when he turned a page too loudly. These were the same people who'd welcomed them with casseroles and warm smiles when they'd first arrived in town. Now they acted like her father was someone to fear. During the fellowship hour after service, the divide became even more apparent. The usual crowd around the coffee and cookies table thinned whenever Ethan approached. Some church members, like Bill Thompson from the hardware store, made a point of coming over to shake Ethan's hand and praise his actions at the picnic. But others huddled in corners, throwing furtive glances their way. Maddie stood near the bulletin board, pretending to read the announcements while actually listening to Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Grant talking behind her. It's not right, Mrs. Peterson whispered. A man with that kind of training. Who knows what he's capable of? And that poor girl, Mrs. Grant replied. growing up with someone so volatile. No mother in the picture either. Maddie's cheeks burned. She wanted to turn around and tell them how wrong they were, how her father was the gentlest man she knew, how he still cut the crusts off her sandwiches, even though she was 17, just because it made her smile. How he stayed up late helping her with calculus homework, even after working 12-hour days at the garage. Instead, she fled to the bathroom, locking herself in a stall until the tears stopped threatening to fall. When she finally emerged, she found Ethan waiting in the hallway. One look at her face told him everything he needed to know. "Ready to head home, kiddo?" he asked softly. Maddie nodded, unable to trust her voice. They walked to their truck in silence, the gravel crunching under their Sunday shoes. The parking lot was still half full, and Maddie could feel the stares following them. Just as they reached their vehicle, she couldn't hold it in anymore. "They think you're dangerous, Dad," she burst out, her voice cracking. "They're acting like you're some kind of monster, but they don't know you at all. They don't know how you sing off-key when you're making breakfast, or how you rescue spiders from the bathroom instead of killing them, or how you—" She broke off, fighting back tears. Ethan turned to face her, his eyes soft with understanding. The morning sunlight caught the silver at his temples, and Maddie was struck by how tired he looked, how human, not dangerous at all, just a father trying his best to protect his daughter. "Come here," he said, opening his arms. Maddie stepped into his embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of his aftershave, mixed with laundry detergent. "People fear what they don't understand," he said quietly, his voice rumbling in his chest. "But love changes hearts." Maddie hugged him tighter, and for a moment, they stood there in the church parking lot, father and daughter, holding on to each other while the world swirled around them with its judgments and misconceptions. The kitchen was filled with the rich aroma of tomato sauce and garlic as Ethan stirred the bubbling pot of his homemade marinara. He'd learned the recipe years ago from his mother, and it had become Maddie's favorite comfort food. Steam rose from the pot of boiling spaghetti as he checked its tenderness with a fork. "Need any help, Dad?" Maddie asked, setting down 2 plates on their small kitchen table. "Almost done here, sweetheart." Ethan smiled, tasting the sauce. "Just like Grandma used to make." Maddie inhaled deeply. "Smells amazing. Remember when I was little and tried to make this myself?" Ethan chuckled, draining the pasta. "How could I forget? You were what, 8? Sauce all over the walls." "Hey, I was trying to be helpful." Maddie laughed, the sound warm and genuine, the first real laugh he'd heard from her since the picnic incident. "Mom always said I had your determination." "That you do." Ethan's eyes softened at the mention of his late wife. He brought the steaming bowls to the table. "Your mother would be proud of how strong you've been lately." They settled into their chairs, the familiar comfort of their evening routine washing over them. Maddie twirled the pasta on her fork, just like her mother had taught her. "Tell me about when you and Mom first met." "Again?" Ethan's eyes crinkled with amusement. "You've heard this story 100 times." "It's my favorite," Maddie insisted, taking a bite of the perfectly cooked spaghetti. "Well," Ethan began, settling back in his chair, "I was home on leave, fixing up my old truck outside the base. Your mother drove by in that beat-up Volkswagen of hers, and it broke down right in front of me. And she thought you were just some grease monkey," Maddie finished, grinning, "until I fixed her car in 10 minutes flat." Ethan laughed. "She insisted on buying me coffee to say thank you. And the rest is history," Maddie said softly, her eyes bright with joy at the familiar tale. They continued eating, sharing more memories. The time they went camping and forgot the tent poles. The Christmas when Maddie insisted on making all the decorations herself. The family road trips where they'd sing off-key to old country songs. After dinner, Maddie helped with the dishes, bumping her hip playfully against her father's as they worked side by side. The tension that had been hanging over their house lately seemed to dissolve in the warm evening air. "Dad," Maddie asked, drying a plate, "can I look through some of the old photo albums tonight?" Ethan paused briefly, then nodded. "They're in the hall closet, top shelf." Maddie retrieved a dusty leather album and settled onto the living room couch. Ethan sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders as she opened to the first page. "Is this you?" She pointed to a younger version of her father, standing straight and proud in his dress uniform. "Basic training graduation," he confirmed. "Your mother took that picture." Maddie turned the pages slowly, studying each photograph. There were shots of Ethan with his unit, men standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces young and determined. Some photos showed them in various locations: desert landscapes, mountain ranges, places Maddie had never seen. "Who's this?" She pointed to a soldier with a wide smile, his arm thrown around Ethan's shoulders. "That's Mike Thompson." Ethan's voice grew quiet. "One of the finest men I ever knew." Maddie noticed the past tense but didn't press. She continued through the album, seeing her father's life before she was born. Moments of camaraderie, of friendship, of service. The images showed a different side of him, yet somehow exactly the same man she knew: strong, dedicated, protective. Near the end of the album, she found a group photo. Ethan stood in the center, surrounded by his team. Their faces were serious, but there was an unmistakable bond evident in their stance, the way they stood close together, trusting and united. "These were your brothers," Maddie said softly. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "They were." Maddie leaned her head against her father's shoulder, understanding now why he rarely spoke of his military days. The weight of those memories, the loss of friends, the sacrifices made, it was all there in the photographs. Later that night, as Maddie got ready for bed, she took one last look at the photo album she'd brought to her room. In the quiet darkness, she traced her finger over her father's younger face in uniform, understanding him in a way she never had before. He wasn't just her dad who fixed cars and made the best spaghetti. He was someone who had served, protected, and sacrificed. "Dad's a hero," she whispered to herself, closing the album gently before turning out the light. Through the thin walls, she could hear him in the kitchen, putting away the last of the dishes, humming softly. The same quiet, steady man who had always been there for her. The same man who had stood up to protect her at the picnic, who continued to protect her every day, not with weapons or force, but with unwavering love and quiet strength. The community center's main hall buzzed with anticipation. Folding chairs filled the space, arranged in neat rows facing a simple wooden podium. Paper streamers in red, white, and blue hung from the ceiling, remnants from the 4th of July celebrations that still hadn't been taken down. Ethan Cole sat in the front row, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He wore his best dress shirt, crisp blue cotton, pressed just this morning. Maddie had helped him pick it out, insisting it brought out the warmth in his eyes. Next to him, she squeezed his arm reassuringly. "You'll do great, Dad," she whispered. Pastor Mike, the event organizer, stepped up to the microphone. "Tonight's fundraiser is about more than just raising money," he began, his voice warm and steady. "It's about building bridges in our community. Our next speaker knows something about that." Ethan's chest tightened. He hadn't spoken publicly since giving mission briefings in the military. This was different, more personal, more vulnerable. "Please welcome Ethan Cole," Pastor Mike announced. The applause was polite, but reserved. Ethan could feel the mixed emotions in the room, some genuine support, some lingering suspicion. He rose slowly, straightened his shirt, and walked to the podium. The wooden steps creaked under his feet. Looking out at the crowd, he saw familiar faces. Mrs. Henderson from the bakery, Coach Thompson from the high school, even some of the troubled teens he'd been mentoring. In the back, he noticed the mayor, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Ethan cleared his throat. "I'm not much for public speaking," he began, his voice quiet but firm. "But sometimes silence isn't the answer." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Many of you know me as the mechanic down on Oak Street. Some of you recently learned about my military background, but there's more to my story." He pulled out an old photograph from his shirt pocket, worn at the edges, but the image still clear. "This is Sarah, my wife," he said, holding it up. "We lost her to cancer 8 years ago. Maddie was 9. A sympathetic murmur rippled through the crowd. Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger. "Before Sarah passed, she made me promise 2 things. First, to raise our daughter with both strength and gentleness. Second, to never let the hardness of the world steal my capacity for compassion." He looked directly at Maddie, who sat with tears already gathering in her eyes. "It hasn't been easy. When you've seen what I've seen in combat, when you've lost what I've lost here at home, it's tempting to build walls, to see threats everywhere, to choose fear over faith." The room was completely silent now, every person leaning forward slightly, drawn in by the raw honesty in his words. "But Sarah was right," Ethan said, his voice catching slightly. "The answer isn't in building walls. It's in building bridges. That's why I started volunteering here at the center. Because every young person needs someone to believe in them. Every parent needs support. Every community needs healing. He pulled out another photo, this one of him and Maddie, at her 16th birthday party last year. My daughter taught me that too. She shows me every day that love is stronger than fear, that forgiveness is better than bitterness, that faith can move mountains or at least help a broken-hearted soldier learn to live again. Tears flowed freely now, not just from Maddie but from many in the audience. Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Even some of the teenage boys Ethan mentored looked down, trying to hide their emotions. This community center isn't just a building, Ethan continued. It's a chance for all of us to choose bridge, building over wall building, to choose understanding over judgment, to choose hope over fear. He straightened his shoulders, his military bearing visible but softened by vulnerability. I'm not asking for your money tonight. I'm asking for your hearts. I'm asking you to believe that change is possible, that redemption is real, that love, his voice cracked slightly, that love never fails. The silence in the room was profound. Then, slowly, people began to stand. First Mrs. Henderson, then Coach Thompson, then the teenagers in the back. Soon the whole room was on their feet, applause thundering through the community center. Ethan looked at Maddie, who was clapping through her tears, her face shining with pride. For the first time since the 4th of July incident, he saw genuine warmth in the faces around him, not fear, not suspicion, but understanding and respect. As he stepped down from the podium, people reached out to shake his hand, pat his shoulder, or simply nod in acknowledgement. Even the mayor's stern expression had softened slightly. In that moment, Ethan felt Sarah's presence strongly, as if she were standing right beside him. He could almost hear her voice. See, love always wins. Maddie rushed forward and wrapped her arms around him, not caring who saw. Dad, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. That was beautiful. The applause continued to fill the room, but for Ethan, the only thing that mattered was his daughter's embrace and the feeling that finally the town was seeing him for who he truly was, not just a soldier, not just a mechanic, but a man of faith and principle who had chosen love over fear. The morning after the fundraiser dawned bright and clear, casting long shadows across Main Street as Ethan opened his auto repair shop. He paused at the entrance, keys in hand, noticing something different. Mrs. Henderson from the bakery next door, who had avoided eye contact for weeks, waved warmly. Morning, Ethan. Would you like a fresh cinnamon roll? Just came out of the oven. Ethan's weathered face softened into a smile. That's mighty kind of you, Mrs. Henderson. Inside his shop, more surprises awaited. The phone rang steadily with new customers booking appointments. People who had canceled their repairs after the incident were calling back. Mr. Peterson, a regular before the trouble started, brought in his pickup truck and clapped Ethan on the shoulder. Heard you speak last night, the older man said, his voice gruff with emotion. Lost my wife 5 years ago. What you said about faith carrying you through, well, it hit home. Ethan wiped his hands on a shop rag, touched by the man's openness. Sometimes sharing our burdens makes them lighter. Around lunchtime, his phone buzzed with a text from Maddie. Dad, you won't believe what happened at school. He called her right away, his heart quickening with worry until he heard the excitement in her voice. Sarah and Jessica asked me to sit with them at lunch, Maddie bubbled. They said what you did at the fundraiser was amazing. Even some of Jared's old friends smiled at me in the hallway. Relief flooded through him. That's wonderful, sweetheart. And Mrs. Thompson, my English teacher? She asked if I'd help start a peer support group. She said my strength could help other kids dealing with tough stuff. Pride swelled in Ethan's chest. His daughter wasn't just surviving, she was flourishing. You'd be perfect for that, Maddie. The afternoon brought more signs of change. Pastor Mike stopped by the shop, suggesting Ethan lead a men's group at church. Your story of redemption and grace, that's exactly what some of our young men need to hear. Even at the grocery store, people approached him. A mother with tears in her eyes thanked him for showing her teenage son that real strength meant standing up for what's right. The produce manager, who'd been cold since the incident, offered him first pick of the fresh tomatoes. By evening, Ethan felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He was working late at the shop when his phone pinged with another text from Maddie. At Ashley's house studying. Having pizza. Home by 9. Love you. Dyer. Ethan glanced at his watch. 6:45 p.m. Have fun. Love you too, he replied. He threw himself into work, rebuilding a transmission, grateful for the normal rhythm of tools and metal. At 9:15, he checked his phone. No Maddie. Everything okay? He texted. No response. By 9:30, unease crept into his stomach. He called Ashley's house. Her mother answered. Oh, the girls left almost 2 hours ago, she said. Maddie said she was walking home. It's just 3 blocks. Ethan's military training kicked in, his senses heightening. He called Maddie again, straight to voicemail. At 10:00, he drove the streets between Ashley's house and home, scanning sidewalks and alleys. No sign of her. He called her friends one by one. Nobody had seen her. The night grew darker. His calls became more frantic. By 10:30, he was ready to contact the police when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message made his blood run cold. Let's see how tough you are now. Ethan stood absolutely still in his kitchen, his hand gripping the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. His combat-trained mind raced through scenarios, calculating risks and responses. Another buzz. A photo this time. Maddie's charm bracelet, the one he'd given her for her 16th birthday, lying on what looked like a concrete floor. The former soldier in him wanted to tear the town apart. The father in him felt terror unlike anything he'd known in combat. But the man of faith he'd become knew that rage and fear were the enemy's weapons. He forced himself to breathe slowly, remembering his training. Focus. Think. Plan. As he reached for his keys to drive to the police station, one more message arrived. Should have kept your mouth shut at the fundraiser, soldier boy. The words blurred before his eyes as 17 years of protecting his daughter, of building a peaceful life, of choosing faith over violence, collided with the ruthless skills he'd hoped never to use again. His phone clattered to the kitchen counter. In the sudden silence, Ethan Cole dropped to his knees and did the hardest thing a warrior could do. He prayed for wisdom to find his daughter without letting darkness consume his heart. But even as he prayed, his fingers were already dialing 911, and his mind was mapping every abandoned building where someone might hide a teenage girl. The Special Forces operator was awakening inside the small-town mechanic. And this time, the mission was personal. He spoke into the phone with controlled calm. My daughter is missing. The dispatcher asked for details, and Ethan provided them with military precision, each word measured, each detail exact. But beneath his composed exterior, a storm was brewing. The kitchen light cast his shadow on the wall, no longer just a father's silhouette, but the outline of a man transforming back into the soldier he'd once been, not by choice, but by necessity. Because somewhere in the darkness, his daughter was waiting, and Ethan Cole would need every skill he'd ever learned to bring her home. His past and present were no longer at war. They had united for a single purpose: saving Maddie. As police sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer to his house, Ethan stood in his quiet kitchen, a man balanced between faith and fury, preparing for the longest night of his life. Ethan's hands trembled as he dialed Maddie's number for the 20th time. The cheerful voice message that usually made him smile now twisted his gut into knots. Hi, this is Maddie. Leave a message. He paced the kitchen floor, wearing a path in the linoleum. The clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m., 4 hours since her last text. His phone buzzed again, and he nearly dropped it, reading the new message. Let's see how tough you are now. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead as he dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice seemed distant, detached. Sir, has it been 24 hours since you last saw your daughter? No, but I know something's wrong, Ethan said, forcing his voice to stay steady. She always calls. Always. And I just got a threatening message. We'll send an officer to take a report, the dispatcher said. But without clear evidence of foul play, Ethan hung up and grabbed his keys. He drove to Sarah Miller's house, where Maddie was supposed to be studying. Sarah's mother answered the door in her bathrobe, confusion etched on her face. Maddie left hours ago, Mrs. Miller said. She said she was walking home. It's only 3 blocks. Back in his truck, Ethan's military training kicked in. He methodically listed the facts. Maddie never made it home. The threatening text. The recent tensions with Jared Thompson and his crew. The pieces clicked together like a terrible puzzle. At the police station, Officer Roberts barely looked up from his computer. "Mr. Cole, we understand you're worried, but teenagers often lose track of time. Mayor Thompson's son already confirmed he hasn't seen your daughter." Ethan's jaw clenched. Of course Jared would deny it. "My daughter is missing, and you're doing nothing because of politics?" "Now, Mr. Cole." Officer Roberts straightened in his chair. "That's a serious accusation. We'll look into it, but without evidence." Ethan stormed out, his boots echoing on the polished floor. In his truck, he gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The threatening message glowed on his phone screen, mocking him. At home, he stood in the middle of Maddie's room. Her bed was still neatly made, homework spread across her desk. A photo of them at last year's father-daughter dance sat on her nightstand. His little girl, so proud in her blue dress, beaming up at him. The familiar weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders. Not the burden of a soldier this time, but of a father. He climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, pulling the cord for the single bulb that illuminated the dusty space. In the far corner sat an olive-drab footlocker he hadn't opened in years. The combination lock clicked softly as his fingers found the numbers by muscle memory. 7, 4, 9. Inside, his past lay neatly folded. Combat boots, tactical gear, the tools of a life he'd left behind. The boots still fit perfectly. He checked the straps on his tactical vest, muscle memory guiding his fingers through the familiar motions. A small GPS tracker, compact but powerful, lay wrapped in soft cloth. Next came the night vision monocular he'd kept just in case. His hands brushed against his old dog tags, and he slipped them over his head. The metal felt cool against his chest, grounding him. This wasn't about being a soldier anymore. This was about being a father. In the bathroom mirror, Ethan barely recognized himself. The quiet mechanic was gone, replaced by something harder, more focused. He'd spent years trying to leave this part of himself behind, praying Maddie would never have to see it. But now, zipping up his black jacket, he knew this was exactly why God had given him these skills. Not for violence, but for protection. Not for war, but for love. His phone buzzed again. Another message. Daddy's little girl isn't so brave now. Ethan's jaw tightened as he laced his boots with precise movements. Each pull of the laces was a prayer, each knot a promise. He thought of Maddie's smile, her laugh, the way she'd curl up next to him during thunderstorms, even now, almost grown. The clock struck midnight as Ethan stood before his bedroom mirror. The familiar weight of his gear settled on his shoulders like an old friend. His face in the reflection showed none of the panic from earlier, only calm, deadly focus. He touched the cross hanging next to his dog tags, remembering his late wife's words. "Your past isn't a burden, Ethan. It's preparation for when someone needs you most." Checking his gear one last time, Ethan whispered into the quiet room. "Hold on, baby girl. Daddy's coming." The night air hung heavy with humidity as Ethan pulled his old black pickup into the nearly empty parking lot of Joey's Diner. Only 3 cars remained. A beat-up Honda Civic, the cook's familiar rusty Chevy, and a sleek blue Mustang he'd seen Jared driving around town. His military training kicked in automatically. Observe, analyze, act. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as a tired waitress wiped down tables. 2 teenage girls huddled in a corner booth, sharing a plate of cold fries. Ethan recognized them from Maddie's school. "Evening, girls," he said, keeping his voice steady despite the fear churning in his stomach. "Either of you seen Maddie tonight?" The girls exchanged nervous glances. The shorter one with red hair twisted her napkin. "She was here earlier with Katie," she said softly. "Around 7. "Did you notice who else was here?" Ethan pulled out his phone, showing them Maddie's last text. The taller girl's eyes widened. "Jared and his friends came in right after." They kept staring at their table. She hesitated. "Katie left first. Then Maddie said she was heading home." "Did you see which way she went?" "Toward Miller Road," the redhead answered. "But, Mr. Cole." She glanced around before lowering her voice. "We saw Jared's car follow her." Ethan's jaw tightened. He left a 20 on their table. "Thank you, girls. Get home safe." Back in his truck, Ethan drove slowly down Miller Road, scanning the darkness. His training taught him to look for disruptions in normal patterns. There, Tire marks swerved onto the shoulder, crushing the tall grass. He pulled over, clicking on his flashlight. A silver charm bracelet glinted in the beam. His throat constricted. Maddie's birthday gift from last year. Nearby, scuff marks in the dirt told a story. Multiple sets of footprints, signs of a struggle. Ethan traced the prints and tire tracks, moving with the silence his special forces years had instilled. They led toward Old Thompson Road, the route to abandoned properties on the outskirts of town. His phone buzzed. Another message. Daddy's little girl isn't so brave now. Rage flared, but Ethan forced it down. Anger led to mistakes. He needed clarity, focus. The skills that had kept him alive in combat zones would help him save his daughter. He drove with his lights off, using the moon's glow to navigate the familiar roads, past Thompson's defunct gas station, beyond the closed paper mill. The old O'Malley farm appeared ahead, its weathered barn a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. Jared's Mustang sat hidden behind a cluster of trees. 2 other vehicles were parked nearby, a red pickup and a dark sedan. Ethan killed his engine and coasted to a stop well back from the barn. Moving like a shadow, he circled the property. His boots, worn smooth from years of service, made no sound on the packed earth. 3 voices drifted from inside the barn, young, cocky, unaware they were being hunted. "Your dad's not so tough now, is he?" Jared's voice carried through gaps in the wooden walls. Ethan's heart clenched at Maddie's muffled reply, defiant even in fear. "He'll find me, and you'll be sorry." A sharp sound, a slap, followed by cruel laughter. Ethan's hands curled into fists, but he couldn't rush in blindly. He had to be smart, strategic. One wrong move could put Maddie in more danger. He counted 4 entry points: the main doors, a side entrance, a backloading gate, and a hayloft. Through cracks in the aged wood, he spotted 3 figures moving around a central support beam. Maddie sat tied to a chair, her face tear-streaked but chin raised proudly. Ethan took slow, measured breaths. The same breathing pattern that had steadied his aim in firefights would now help him save his little girl. He pulled his phone out one last time, typing quickly, "Chief Roberts, O'Malley Barn. Maddie kidnapped. 3 suspects. Coming in now." He pressed send, knowing the police would be too late to help but would arrive in time for arrests. This part he had to handle himself, not as a soldier, but as a father. A cool breeze carried the sound of Maddie's frightened sob. Ethan moved toward the barn's shadow, his heart pounding with a father's fierce love and determination. Years of combat experience had taught him how to control fear, channel it into focused action, but nothing in his military career had prepared him for the terror of hearing his daughter cry. His fingers found the rough wood of the barn's wall as he edged closer to the side door. Inside, he could hear the boys arguing, their voices sharp with nervous energy. They were amateurs, scared kids playing at being tough guys. But scared people were dangerous people. Through a gap in the boards, he watched Jared pace back and forth, trying to mask his own fear with bravado. The mayor's son kept checking his phone, running hands through his hair. The other 2 boys stood awkwardly near Maddie, shifting their weight from foot to foot. Ethan reached the side door. The old hinges would creak if he wasn't careful. He took another deep breath, centering himself. In the stillness, he could hear Maddie's quiet sniffling. "Dad will come," she whispered more to herself than her captors. "He always comes." Her faith in him squeezed Ethan's heart. In all his years of service, he'd never had a mission this important, this personal. He touched the door handle, ready to enter. A floorboard creaked under one of the boys' feet. "Did you hear something?" one of them asked nervously. "Shut up," Jared snapped. "Nobody knows we're here." But Ethan was there, and he was done waiting. He eased the door open just enough to slip inside, staying in the shadows cast by old farm equipment. The smell of musty hay and engine oil filled his nostrils. His eyes adjusted quickly to the dim interior, picking out obstacles and positions. Maddie sat beneath a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, her hands bound behind the chair. Her chin trembled, but her eyes stayed fierce. So much like her mother, so much strength in such a small frame. 20 feet separated Ethan from his daughter. 20 feet and 3 scared, foolish boys who had no idea what kind of force they'd provoked. Not his military prowess, but something far more powerful. A father's love. From the darkness, Ethan heard Maddie's sharp intake of breath. Somehow, she sensed his presence. Her eyes darted toward his position, then quickly away, not wanting to give him away. His brave, smart girl. A sob caught in her throat. But this one sounded different, like hope. The old barn door creaked open beneath Ethan's careful touch. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the wooden slats, casting long shadows across hay-strewn floors. His breath came steady and controlled, just as it had in countless operations overseas. But this was different. This was Maddie. Inside, voices echoed from the barn's upper level. He recognized Jared's arrogant tone, trying to sound tough, but wavering with uncertainty.
Your dad's not so special now, is he?
Ethan moved like a shadow, his boots making no sound on the worn planks. Years of training merged with a father's protective instinct as he climbed the ladder to the hayloft. Through the gaps in the flooring, he could see 3 figures. Jared and his 2 friends pacing nervously while Maddie sat tied to a support beam, her head held high despite tear-stained cheeks. Pride and anger warred in Ethan's chest. His daughter was showing remarkable courage, but these boys had crossed a line that demanded response. He took a deep breath, remembering his commanding officer's words from long ago. The strongest warrior knows when not to strike. "This is stupid, Jared," one of the boys muttered. "We should just let her go." "Shut up," Jared snapped, his voice cracking. "My dad will finally see I'm not worthless when—" Ethan chose that moment to step into view. "When what, son?" The boys whirled around, faces draining of color. Maddie's eyes lit up with relief and hope. "Dad!" she cried out. Jared's friends backed away, but the mayor's son pulled out a switchblade with trembling hands. "Stay back. I'm warning you." Ethan's voice remained calm, steady. "You've got 2 choices right now, Jared. The smart one or the painful one." One of Jared's friends broke first, turning to run. Ethan moved with practiced efficiency, grabbing the boy's jacket and using his momentum to spin him face first against a post. Not enough to hurt, just to hold. The second boy charged with more bravado than skill. Ethan stepped aside, swept the teen's legs, and guided him down with a controlled arm lock. "Stay down, son. This doesn't need to get worse." Jared stood frozen, knife still extended but shaking visibly now.
You can't touch me. My father—"
"Your father," Ethan interrupted, "would be heartbroken to see you right now." He kept his voice gentle but firm. "This isn't who you are, Jared. Not really." "You don't know anything about me." Jared's voice cracked with emotion. "I know you're hurting. I know you're trying to prove something." Ethan took a step forward. "But this isn't the way." Tears welled in Jared's eyes. The knife wavered. "My dad never." Jared choked on the words. "He never sees me. Never has time. Always disappointed." "Then be better than this," Ethan said softly. "Make him proud by doing what's right, not what's easy." The knife clattered to the floor. Jared's shoulders slumped as the fight drained out of him. He sank to his knees, sobbing. Ethan moved past him to Maddie, his heart pounding as he untied the ropes. The moment her hands were free, she threw herself into his arms, trembling. "I knew you'd come," she whispered through tears. Ethan held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. "I'll always come," he whispered back. His voice caught with emotion as he stroked her hair. "Always." Behind them, Jared's friends remained where they were, subdued and ashamed. Jared himself hadn't moved, tears falling silently as he knelt in the hay. Maddie pulled back slightly, looking at her father with wet eyes. In the dim light of the barn, she saw both versions of him clearly. The fierce warrior who had just disabled 3 attackers without throwing a single punch, and the gentle father who had braided her hair for school plays. Her protector and her dad, all in one. Ethan kept one arm around Maddie as he turned to face the boys. Even now, after what they'd done, he saw them not as enemies, but as lost children who needed guidance more than punishment. His voice carried the weight of experience and the warmth of compassion. "The police will be here soon," he said quietly. "You'll face consequences for this. That's how life works. But what matters most is what you learn from tonight, what you choose to become tomorrow." Jared looked up, his face streaked with tears. Why aren't you hurting us, after what we did?" "Because violence isn't strength," Ethan replied. "Real strength is knowing when not to use force, and having the courage to show mercy. He felt Maddie squeeze his hand, and in that gesture was understanding beyond her years. She had seen her father choose compassion over vengeance, had watched him defeat not just his opponents but the very cycle of violence itself. The night air carried the distant sound of approaching sirens. Ethan Cole stood in the moonlit barn, holding his daughter close, while three young men faced the consequences of their choices. But in that moment of resolution, seeds of change had been planted. In Jared's broken pride, in Maddie's deepened admiration, and in the quiet example of a warrior who chose to heal rather than harm. "Dad?" Maddie's voice was soft against his chest. "Yes, sweetheart, I love you." Ethan tightened his embrace, his heart full. "I love you too, baby girl. Let's go home." The pale moonlight filtered through the barn's broken slats, casting long shadows across the dirt floor. Ethan stood tall, his military bearing unmistakable as he faced the three trembling young men huddled against the hay bales. Jared, the mayor's son, had lost all his earlier bravado, his face streaked with tears and dust. "Please, Mr. Cole," Jared whimpered. "We didn't mean what?" Ethan's voice was deadly quiet, barely containing the fury that made his hands shake. "Didn't mean to terrorize my daughter? Didn't mean to tie her up like an animal?" Behind him, Maddie sat on an old wooden crate, rubbing her wrists where the ropes had chafed them raw. Her eyes darted between her father and her captors, worried about what might happen next. "We just wanted to scare you," one of Jared's friends stammered. "To teach you a lesson for embarrassing us at the picnic." Ethan took a step forward, and all three boys flinched. His combat training screamed at him to act, to make them feel the same fear they'd inflicted on his little girl. His knuckles whitened as he clenched his fists. But then, like a gentle whisper through time, he heard Sarah's voice, his wife's last words before cancer took her away. "Promise me you'll choose love over anger, Ethan. Show Maddie that strength isn't just about power." The memory hit him like a physical blow, making him pause. He unclenched his fist slowly, each finger releasing its tension as he fought back the rage that threatened to consume him. "Dad?" Maddie's voice was soft, uncertain. Ethan turned slightly, keeping the boys in his peripheral vision. His daughter's face, though tear-stained, showed concern not for herself, but for him. She was watching to see what kind of man her father truly was. "You boys," Ethan said, his voice steady now, "are going to face what you've done. Not through violence, but through justice." He pulled out his phone and dialed the police, maintaining eye contact with Jared. "This is Ethan Cole. I've found my daughter at the old Morrison barn. She was kidnapped by three young men who are still here. Send cars immediately." The boys shifted nervously, but none dared move. They'd seen enough in Ethan's eyes to know running wasn't an option. "Mr. Cole," Jared spoke up, his voice cracking, "my father, he'll destroy you for this." Ethan walked over to the hay bale and sat down, positioning himself between the boys and the barn's exit. "Your father, Jared, will learn the same lesson you're about to learn. Actions have consequences, and no amount of power or influence changes that." Maddie stood up shakily and moved to sit beside her father. He wrapped one strong arm around her shoulders, keeping his other hand free, just in case. "You know what the hardest part of Special Forces training was?" Ethan asked, his voice taking on a teaching tone that surprised even himself. The boys stared at him, confused by this unexpected turn. "Learning when not to act. Anyone can throw a punch or pull a trigger. The real strength is in knowing when to show mercy." Red and blue lights began flashing through the barn's windows, casting rotating shadows across their faces. The sound of police cars crunching over gravel filled the night air. "I'm choosing mercy tonight," Ethan continued. "Not because you deserve it, but because it's what my daughter needs to see. It's what your parents need to see. It's what this whole town needs to see." Officers burst through the barn door, weapons drawn. Ethan raised his hands calmly, then gestured to the three boys. "These young men need to be arrested for kidnapping," he stated clearly. "My daughter will press charges, and I'll testify to everything I've seen." As the police led the boys away in handcuffs, Jared looked back one last time. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and for the first time that night, his words rang true. Ethan helped Maddie to her feet, supporting her as they walked toward the barn door. The first hints of dawn were breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and purples. The darkness was lifting, both outside and in their hearts. "Dad?" Maddie stopped just before they reached the door. Yes, sweetheart? Mom would be proud of you tonight. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He pulled his daughter close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Together they stepped out of the barn and into the breaking dawn, leaving the darkness behind them. The morning light stretched across the fields, golden and new. As father and daughter made their way through the dewy grass, each step took them further from the nightmare and closer to a new beginning, their shadows growing longer behind them as the sun rose steadily higher in the sky. The fluorescent lights of Pine Creek Police Station hummed overhead as Ethan Cole guided 3 subdued teenagers through the glass doors. His hand rested firmly but gently on Jared Thompson's shoulder, while 2 patrol officers flanked the other boys. Maddie walked close to her father's side, her face still bearing traces of dried tears. Sheriff Daniels looked up from his desk, his eyes widening at the sight. "Mr. Cole?" He stood quickly, taking in the unusual group before him. "These young men have something to confess," Ethan said quietly, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had first surfaced at the 4th of July picnic. "They kidnapped my daughter tonight." The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Jared's face as he stared at the floor, his previous bravado completely deflated. His 2 friends shuffled nervously beside him, looking even younger in the stark station lighting. "Is this true, Miss Cole?" Sheriff Daniels asked, his tone gentler as he addressed Maddie. Maddie nodded, unconsciously moving closer to her father. "They took me to the old Thompson barn. They wanted to scare my dad." Her voice trembled slightly, but she held her head high. The sheriff's face hardened as he gestured to his deputies. "Book them, all 3. "Wait!" Jared's voice cracked. "My father, you can't—" "Your father isn't here right now," Sheriff Daniels said firmly, but the main door burst open before he could finish. Mayor Robert Thompson stormed in, his typically polished appearance slightly disheveled, his face flushed with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his eyes landing on his son. "Jared?" "Mr. Mayor," Ethan spoke before anyone else could respond. "Your son and his friends abducted my daughter tonight. They held her against her will." The mayor's face reddened further. "Ridiculous! This is obviously a misunderstanding. Boys will be boys." "No, Robert." Sheriff Daniels stepped forward, squaring his shoulders. "This isn't something we can sweep under the rug. These boys committed a serious crime." The mayor turned on the sheriff, jabbing a finger in his direction. "Now you listen here, Dan. I've overlooked a lot of things over the years. But if you think—" "Dad, stop." Jared's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through his father's tirade like a knife. "We did it. We took her." His shoulders slumped. "We wanted to teach Mr. Cole a lesson, but—" He glanced at Ethan, something like respect mixing with his shame. "He could have hurt us. Really hurt us. But he didn't." The mayor's mouth opened and closed, his carefully maintained world crumbling around him. "Son, your boy needs help, Robert," Ethan said quietly. "Not excuses, not cover-ups. Real help." He paused, his voice softening. "The kind of help I'm offering at the community center, if you'll let him have it." The station fell silent, except for the gentle whir of an ancient ceiling fan. Outside, the sound of cars pulling up and doors slamming broke the tension. Curious faces began appearing in the windows. Word traveled fast in Pine Creek. Sheriff Daniels cleared his throat. "Mayor Thompson, your son and his friends are going to be charged. But," he glanced at Ethan, "given Mr. Cole's remarkable restraint and their age, we'll take that into consideration." The mayor seemed to age years in moments, his political mask cracking to reveal a worried father underneath. He looked at his son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. "Jared, what have you done?" "I'm sorry, Dad," Jared whispered, tears finally breaking free. "I just wanted you to notice me." The mayor stepped back as if struck. He turned to Ethan, his voice rough. "Mr. Cole, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Ethan replied. "Just help your son become the man I know he can be." He squeezed Maddie's shoulder. "That's what fathers do." The deputies began the booking process, leading the 3 teenagers away. Jared glanced back once, meeting Ethan's eyes with a mix of fear and gratitude before disappearing around the corner. More townspeople were gathering outside now, their faces pressed against the station windows. News of Maddie's kidnapping and rescue had spread like wildfire through the small community. But instead of the divided whispers from before, There was a unified concern, a rallying around the Coles. Maddie slipped her hand into her father's, watching as Sheriff Daniels efficiently directed his deputies and handled the paperwork. The mayor stood alone by the desk, his usual commanding presence diminished, looking lost in thought. "You okay, sweetheart?" Ethan asked softly, looking down at his daughter. "Yeah, Dad." Maddie managed a small smile. "I am now." She squeezed his hand tighter as more faces appeared at the windows. Many of them familiar parents from school, people from church, regulars from her father's auto shop. They weren't there to gawk or judge. They were there to show support. Sheriff Daniels approached them once more, his badge catching the fluorescent light. "Mr. Cole, we'll need statements from both of you, but it can wait until morning. You've been through enough tonight." He extended his hand to Ethan. "Thank you for showing us what real strength looks like." Ethan shook the offered hand, nodding slightly. The crowd outside had grown larger, their murmurs audible even through the glass. What had started as a handful of curious onlookers had become a genuine show of community support, with people holding impromptu vigil in the station's parking lot. Mrs. Henderson from the bakery held up a handwritten sign, "We stand with the Coles." Tom Wilson, whose truck Ethan had fixed last month, stood with his whole family. Even Reverend Mitchell had arrived, speaking quietly with groups of concerned citizens. Maddie pressed closer to her father's side, watching the gathering crowd with wonder. "Dad, look," she whispered, squeezing his hand again. The darkness that had threatened to overwhelm their lives was being pushed back by the light of community, love, and understanding. Sheriff Daniels opened the station door, letting in the sound of supportive voices and the cool night air. The mayor, still standing by the desk, watched silently as Pine Creek wrapped its arms around the family he had tried so hard to silence. Autumn leaves scattered across the community center's parking lot as Ethan Cole pulled up in his weathered pickup truck. The morning sun cast long shadows through the trees, and a crisp breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee from the diner across the street. Maddie sat beside him, clutching her tutoring materials. "You sure about this, Dad?" she asked, eyeing the entrance where 3 familiar figures stood shuffling their feet. Ethan's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel before he relaxed them. "Everyone deserves a second chance, sweetheart. Even people who've made terrible mistakes." They stepped out of the truck together. Kyle, Marcus, and Tim, Jared's former friends, stood awkwardly by the community center doors, wearing orange vests that marked them as part of the court-mandated community service program. Their faces showed a mix of shame and uncertainty as Ethan approached. "Morning, gentlemen," Ethan said, his voice steady and calm. The same voice that had once commanded troops now carried a different kind of authority, one born of compassion rather than force. "Mr. Cole," they mumbled in unison, unable to meet his eyes. Ethan unlocked the community center doors and held them open. "Let's get started. We've got a lot of work to do today." Inside, the gymnasium echoed with their footsteps. Maddie headed to her usual corner where she tutored younger students, while Ethan led the boys to a circle of chairs. "First thing we're going to do," Ethan said, taking a seat, "is talk about choices. Every morning we wake up with the power to choose who we want to be." Kyle, the tallest of the 3, shifted uncomfortably. "Why are you being nice to us after what we did?" "Because holding on to anger hurts everyone," Ethan replied, his eyes kind but serious. "And because I've seen enough darkness in my life to know that light is always the better choice." Over the next few hours, Ethan guided them through team-building exercises. They stacked cups together, solved puzzles, and worked on communication skills. With each activity, the tension in their shoulders eased slightly. From her tutoring corner, Maddie watched between helping students with math problems. She saw how her father's patience slowly broke through their defensive walls. When Kyle struggled with a particular challenge, Ethan didn't ridicule or shame him. He offered quiet encouragement until Kyle succeeded. By mid-morning, more community members began filtering in. Mrs. Henderson from the library brought books for the reading program. Officer Martinez dropped by with information about the Youth Police Academy. The atmosphere grew warmer, more welcoming. During their water break, Marcus approached Ethan hesitantly. "Mr. Cole, I've been thinking about what you said about choices. I want to apologize, really apologize, to Maddie, if that's okay." Ethan nodded and called Maddie over. She came, standing tall beside her father. "I'm sorry, Maddie," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "What we did was wrong. All of it. The bullying, the kidnapping, You didn't deserve any of it." Maddie looked at her father, drawing strength from his presence. "Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot." As the morning progressed, more walls came down. Tim helped a younger kid with his basketball dribbling. Kyle discovered he had a talent for organizing the supply closet. The community center filled with the sounds of productive activity and occasional laughter. Other teenagers began drifting in, some from troubled backgrounds, others just looking for guidance. They watched as Ethan worked with the three boys, saw how he treated them with respect despite their past actions, and were drawn to his quiet strength. Near lunchtime, Sheriff Wilson stopped by. He stood in the doorway, observing the scene before him. Ethan Cole, the man some had once feared, teaching conflict resolution to the very boys who had tried to hurt his family. Maddie confidently leading her study group. The three young men in orange vests working alongside other teens, their earlier shame replaced by purpose. "You've built something special here, Cole," the sheriff said quietly. Ethan shook his head. "We all built it together. That's the only way healing happens." The community center buzzed with activity now. Parents dropped in to check on their kids and stayed to help. Someone brought sandwiches. The atmosphere felt like a family gathering rather than a punishment detail. Tim approached Ethan with a notebook. "I've been writing down some ideas," he said, "for other kids who might be heading down the wrong path. Maybe we could start a peer mentoring program." Ethan smiled, genuine pride showing in his eyes. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need." Maddie watched her father work with the boys, saw how his military discipline had transformed into something gentler but no less powerful. He was still a protector, but now he protected through guidance rather than force. The morning session wrapped up with a group discussion. Teens and adults sat together in a large circle, sharing thoughts about community, forgiveness, and growth. The three boys in orange vests spoke up more frequently now, their earlier reluctance fading. Looking around the room, Ethan saw something he hadn't expected when this day began. Hope. It showed in the way Kyle helped a younger kid tie his shoes, in how Marcus and Tim worked together to organize the next day's activities, in the easy conversations between people who weeks ago had been divided by fear and misunderstanding. The community center had become more than just a building. It was becoming a symbol of what their town could be. As Ethan watched Maddie confidently leading her study group, he felt the warmth of genuine healing begin to spread through their community. The laughter and teamwork filling the room spoke of something profound, the power of choosing light over darkness, forgiveness over vengeance, and hope over fear. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Ethan and Maddie Cole walked hand in hand through the town square. The October breeze carried the sweet scent of fall, rustling through the trees that lined the sidewalks. Their footsteps fell in sync, a habit formed through months of these cherished evening walks. "Remember when people used to cross the street when they saw us coming?" Maddie asked, squeezing her father's hand. Her voice held no bitterness, only wonder at how much had changed. Ethan smiled, nodding at Mrs. Henderson as she waved from her flower shop. "Things have a way of working themselves out when you stay true to what's right." They passed the diner where Tommy, one of Jared's former friends, was waiting tables, part of his rehabilitation program. The young man caught their eye through the window and gave a respectful nod. Ethan returned the gesture, remembering how far the boy had come under his mentorship at the community center. "Dad," Maddie said, pausing near the gazebo where the town band practiced on weekends, "I never thanked you properly, not just for saving me that night, but for showing me what real strength looks like." Ethan's chest tightened with emotion. His daughter stood tall now, her chin held high. So different from the scared girl who'd once begged to stay home from school. "You don't need to thank me, sweetheart. Being your father is thanks enough." They continued their walk, greeting familiar faces along the way. Outside the hardware store, Mayor Richards, a changed man since his son's arrest, stopped to chat. "Ethan, Maddie," he said warmly. "The youth program's doing wonders. Even Jared mentions you in his letters from rehab. Your son's making progress," Ethan replied. "That's what matters." As they rounded the corner toward the park, children played on the swings while their parents sat nearby, completely at ease. Several months ago, parents had hurried their kids away when Ethan approached. Now, they called out friendly hellos. "Miss Cole," a small voice piped up. One of Maddie's tutoring students, Sarah, ran up to them. "I got an A on my math test. Maddie knelt down to give the girl a high five. "See? I told you you could do it." Ethan watched his daughter with pride. She'd grown into such a compassionate young woman, turning her own painful experiences into a source of help for others, just like her mother would have wanted. They made their way to their favorite bench overlooking the duck pond. The setting sun painted the water in shades of gold and pink. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the ducks paddle lazily across the surface. "The 4th of July celebration is tomorrow," Maddie mentioned, her eyes twinkling. "Hard to believe it's been a year since everything changed." Ethan thought back to that pivotal moment, confronting those boys, not knowing it would set off a chain of events that would test their faith, courage, and love. Sometimes the hardest moments lead to the greatest blessings. As twilight settled over the square, the first test fireworks shot into the sky, the town's preparation for tomorrow's big show. Brilliant colors exploded overhead, reflecting in Maddie's eyes as she looked up in wonder. "They're setting up early this year," Ethan observed, watching the colorful display. "Remember when I was little and fireworks scared me?" Maddie laughed. "You'd hold me close and tell me they were just angels having a party in heaven." "Your mother came up with that one," Ethan admitted with a soft chuckle. "She always knew exactly what to say." Another burst of light illuminated their faces. Maddie leaned her head on her father's shoulder, just like she used to do as a child. "Best dad ever," she whispered. Ethan wrapped his arm around her shoulders, his heart full. The fireworks continued to paint the darkening sky, but he barely noticed them. In this moment, he knew with absolute certainty that their bond, tested by fire and strengthened by faith, was truly unbreakable. Through all the challenges they'd faced, through the darkness and light, their story had become one of redemption, faith, and most importantly, love. As father and daughter sat together under the summer sky, they were exactly where they needed to be, together, stronger than ever. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan Cole, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.